Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest in our series of speaker interviews. My name is Maurice Button, CEO of City and Financial Global, and with me today is Charlotte Crosswell, OBE, Chair of the Centre for Finance, Innovation and Technology. Charlotte's going to be speaking at our Payments Regulation and Innovation Summit on the 25th of January in London. Charlotte, welcome.
Oh, thank you, and great to see you, and thanks for the invite to speak.
Our pleasure. Let's turn to the question, Charlotte. Joe Garner recently published his report on the government's future of payments review, in which he called for a national payments vision and strategy. What form do you think this vision should take?
I firstly want to congratulate Joe for navigating a challenging subject when there's so many reviews have been done around the payment space.
Yeah.
Probably got 20 ideas that went in there that he couldn't put in because they're out of scope. But I think on that, it is really important now that we pull this together. Obviously, Treasury is going to be the secretariat for this vision. And we've got to look at everything else that's happening in payments because, for example, new payments architecture was out of scope, international payments was out of scope, but it's difficult to put a UK vision for payments forward if we don't look at some of those. How does this all fit together? Yeah. And importantly, what are overseas markets doing on this? Because we can look at how we can progress this in the UK and we can define an amazing vision strategy. But what we're obviously seeing is other markets around the world taking different approaches to payments, particularly in the developing markets as they're innovating into financial services and other markets that are innovating out of. And I think, I'm really hopeful that that vision will pull that together, all the reviews that have been done, looking at the complex piece of open banking payments, which obviously he touched on in the review as a recommendation, and then really gives solid vision going forward.
Do you think that in developing markets that there are fewer sort of legacy barriers to innovation? Do you think they're able to innovate quicker because they don't have to deal with everything that pre-existed?
Well, certainly when you are able to deliver something that people want and they don't have already, it becomes very easy when you've got a blank sheet of paper. And if I look at the work that even CFIT's doing at the moment, we're very much looking at this as outcomes based. What do consumers and SMEs need from the financial system rather than what can be delivered? And I think it's important that you take that step back. But I agree, when we look at what happened in M-Pesa in Africa with payments, what Indians have done with UPI, what's happened with PIX in Brazil, it's incredible the innovation that's coming through, and they are able to move at pace. And slightly we look at that jealousy. But we have to remember that we've got all the other ingredients here in the UK. We have regulators, we have the banks at the table, we have the fintechs who can deliver this, and we have a genuine desire for policymakers to drive us forward. So, the grass has always seemed greener. I spend a lot of time talking to those international hubs who are always saying, "Oh, in the UK, you've got this." So, it's not a bad, but I think there is a lot we can learn from their pace and the way they approach this. And the value of some of the data that those markets are using to innovate into payments, which perhaps we don't look at quite enough.
Yeah, very interesting. The review recommends that open banking is leveraged to improve person-to-person bank transfers, and that an open banking alternative payment structure be introduced to give retailers an alternative to card fees. What trends have you seen in the use of open banking in these areas, and how do you think this could be enhanced?
Well, obviously, I'm slightly biased, having only stepped away amazingly earlier this year as the chair of open banking, which was a real privilege to lead through, and just great to see the regulators now taking that work forward and the work that Brian Zhang put forward. Clearly, open banking, the technology gives us a huge opportunity, and I think we have to remember it is the technology, it's the sharing of data to deliver better outcomes. And the scope of the CMA order was actually quite limited, incredibly complex to bring in. I think everyone would recognise it took a lot longer than anyone thought it would. And some of the outcomes have changed because of the time it's taken. But if we look particularly around the payment side of this, obviously adoption by public sector and HMRC, for example, has really driven up the adoption of use this as a technology. Now, we're not seeing it yet in store. We have just seen one of the big tech firms and now have just adopted open banking. So if you download your latest iOS 17.1, you will be able to use open banking as you make a payment. But it's been quite slow. But what we're now seeing, as I said, with HMRC being able to pay their tax for open banking, I understand you can pay your court by open banking, and on top of the open banking providers who are pushing this forward in the private sector, we will see that tipping point where everyone sees this as another method of payment. And I think that's something that we saw this in Oyster cards. People suddenly realised that was a payment method, and drive it forward. And what 7 million users now in open banking. So at what point do you see that tipping point? Is it 10? Is it 15? But it probably won't be anything above that. We will get that, and then adoption will move forward. And obviously, Joe Garner's recommendations around this to make it easier to adopt, I think, is going to be quite key to driving that forward. So I would say we're right at the beginning of the journey. I think a lot of the open banking providers would probably disagree with me. But we have got all the foundations. It's taken a long time, but now we have the ability to build on it quite quickly.
And we're heading towards that tipping point, as you say. The review also recommends that the Government and Joint Regulatory Oversight Committee prioritise agreement of a commercial model for open banking, so that there is scope to invest in both infrastructure and consumer protection. Without sustainable financials, it is said, it's hard to see that open banking can thrive over the long term. Do you agree? I suspect you don't, but I'll ask the question.
Well, we've already seen this as a competition remedy. So the banks obviously had to pay to introduce open banking, and it does now need to come out of that competition remedy because it's so limited in its scope into the wider world. And some of that is going to require commercial opportunities. Now, there's many commercial opportunities we can look at, and I expect the answer to those may change over the next year or two. And most of the fintechs, third-party providers, would recognise that there's going to have to be a more equitable model. Is that pay to play? Is it all you can eat? Is it is it the banks? And how do we level up all of the other banks as well? Because obviously it was only mandated on the CMA 9, but actually what it looked like, so anybody who's making a payment can do it with any bank. So I do believe we will need to have a fairer funding and operating model, because that includes the liabilities around this. And I don't envy having to the team doing that and putting those recommendations forward. But clearly the banks now are seeing this as an opportunity for them. So they're at the table voluntarily. They're driving forward those conversations. They're incentivized to find it. And I think I do have hope that there will be some good solutions coming forward over the next few months. And I think that work is definitely happening at pace now.
Well, that's a good positive note on which to end this interview as we run out of time. But for our viewers, we very much hope that you'll be able to come and see Charlotte speak at the event and all the other excellent speakers we have. And it's the Payments Regulation Innovation Summit on 25th of January next year in central London. So Charlotte, thank you very much for sharing those thoughts. I look forward to seeing you at the end of Jan.
Thank you, and looking forward to it.